Americans and history are the weirdest fucking thing. I don't know. I don't get it.
Our emotional support racist on our paper money. We can't get rid of them.
Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland, 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 land, land, land.
All right, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to Dixieland, the Proletariat. We're going to talk about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. Make sure to like us on social media at Dixieland of the Proletariat, or find all of our links at our link tree. That's linktree.ee/.prol, DOT-prol, where if you want to give your wages to a bunch of rednecks, you'll find a link to our Patreon. We got some cool stuff to give you, including CDs, stickers, cookbooks, Discord server, and exclusive episodes. We also have a Spotify playlist with some great artists you also check out.
The BBC is interrupting its normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of Her Majesty the Queen.
Merch store. This podcast is brought to you by contractional monogamy, not being able to afford therapy, living at home, beta blockers, Kaiser pushing white men in the swamps, Nelson's love life, Tyler's testosterone levels, Mark's laughter, which brings joy to the masses, the ghosts of old Dale Earnhardt and Queen Elizabeth. Shout out to our new Patreon subscribers, Merrill and Scott. Our intro music is by Psychotic Refuge. Our producer is Mr. Speaker. A monthly Patreon surplus goes to groups that are run by and or help marginalized people directly. And as always, I'm Nelson with...
And I'm celebrating.
And so am I.
And our guest this evening is...
Hey, y'all. I am Chelsea, host of Rednecks Rising, an anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-fascist Appalachian podcast based out of the hollers of Western North Carolina.
All right, fuck, that was fancy as shit.
Nice.
Trying to one up us.
What happens when you have another podcast host on
Yeah,
your
whatever.
podcast?
All right, and muted. There we go. All right, y'all, we're back. This is an After Dark episode now. Oh yeah. So anyway, Kai, we need to ask, since you're a ground zero of the greatest tragedy of the 21st century.
You mean since Big Ben has blown up?
Yes, a second queen has hit the towers.
Jesus!
Not tomorrow being the anniversary of 9/11.
Oh, there's so many people that are going to be banned from social media tomorrow. So many. No, the Brits are like, all right, America, we see you with the Queen memes. Tomorrow's 9/11. Let's see what happens. Anyway, Kai, can you give us a firsthand account of what is going on in that unseasoned island nation?
You mean this quaint island full of restless natives who have never seen the likes of a civilization like my own?
The noble savages.
These unwashed legs. Well, I will say that it was a bit weird having like, oh, the queen is in ill health, and then like 4 hours later, oh shit, she's dead. Oh, the royal family is congregating, everything's fine, never mind, she's dead. Like, it was that fast.
She meets Truss and dies.
Truss was playing the long fucking game. This is so anybody who doesn't know, Liz Truss was just brought in as prime minister. I can't say elected because Boris Johnson stepped down, which means that the new leader of the Conservative Party is automatically the prime minister, which means it's Liz Truss. Liz Truss used to be a Lib Dem in the UK party system. She used to be openly anti-monarchy. She used to have like loads of things that were like marginally good, like verging on the good side of standard politics in the UK. And then like gets put into the prime minister's position, goes to visit the Queen at Balmoral up in Scotland, and like the next day fucking just gone. She's dead. Liz Truss is playing the long game, pretending she was conservative. She just waited until she got put in there.
That's assassination on record.
Liz Truss is who leaked those like photos and shit about Boris Johnson and those parties to the Sun. Liz Truss is like, just it was all part of my plan.
And all this time we were watching her, like I was watching bits on TikTok of her where like, oh, she's dangerously delusional. What the fuck is happening? And there was like a long period of time where Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, who was the other person who might have become prime minister, these two people would like go to like stumping places and they would say, oh, that one is a monster, watch how much worse I can be. It was literally like that. Like Rishi Sunak would go to places where it's like the poshest of posh, like over here middle class means like middle class means you're rich basically. So like go to these
so there is a middle class over there.
It's barely. It's the non-landed gentry, but they have all the money. It's the middle class. People who wear tweed unironically, like these people. So Rishi Sunak would go to these places and be like, oh yeah, we could definitely fuck over poor people more. Like basically you could like tear down everything he said to that. And then Liz Truss would go, oh, he's gonna fuck over like poor people more. I'm gonna fuck over everybody by not giving anybody any money for the upcoming like fuel crisis that's coming up this winter.
The Tories, like the Conservative Party was like, all right, how racist can we be? And they're like, all right, so we've had two women that were prime ministers under our watch, but we can't elect a brown man. That would be bad. So we're just gonna go with the white woman again.
So yeah, Queen's gone. Queen kicked it. Woo. There's been an upswelling of Republican sentiment in Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. I don't know about the Isle of Man has like 18 people on it. God love them. They want their independence too, but I never hear anything from them. Like Cornwall has always been like, we're a separate nation. Like it's all happening. And then if anybody's seen I can't remember exactly which article it was, but there's this article where the preview image was like what happens when the Queen dies, and it was a picture of Liz with her eyes closed, and then there was Big Ben in the background just fucking exploding. So that happened, I guess. Big Ben is gone. Liz kicked the bucket. Here we are in a new Republican oasis, I guess.
Oliver Cromwell's come back from the dead.
Nah, fuck him. We can be a republic. We can have republics without having fucking Oliver Cromwell, just like fucking anybody who wasn't like the most English person.
Oliver Cromwell's like, Charles the what is king?
Yeah,
good luck.
Good luck, Chuck. Charles III. You can either be a very small dog or the first king who was beheaded in the UK. So,
oh my god, what the? It's just like someone said it best. I think it was our old friend Black Redguard said that Charles just looks like some drunk dude they pulled out of a pub and they're like, "You're king now." His face is like bloodshot eyes. His skin is just, oh my god. He's how old is he? Like 76? He's
70, yes, in his mid-70s.
And he's waited the longest to ever become king, apparently. Oh man. I wonder how long he's gonna last.
The one thing that I want to bring up that a lot of like Americans especially, because a lot of the other English speaking countries are commonwealths or former British colonies, so they understand a little bit more than this, but almost every American that I've talked to has brought up at some point, oh, I think they're gonna skip Charles and they'll go straight to William. Like, I don't know who this mythical they is. It's literally a monarchy. There is no one who is going to make decisions on the outside of that. Like, we literally
there's no
can't
Congress of the royal family.
Nobody's picking the king. The king, it's divine right of kings.
It's this mysterious they. It's the same they that controls the world government. It's the one that puts the king.
The New World Order will change it.
There's only in all of British history, there's only one very select group of people that can ever destroy the British monarchy, and that is divorced American women. They're the only ones who can ever disrupt the divine right of kings, because we got what's her face, Wallace Simpson, right?
Simpson, Nazi sympathizer Wallace Simpson.
Yeah, she got the Nazi king out of there because she was like, I've been divorced and you love me, and he's like, I love you, I don't want to be king anymore. Have my like stuttering brother be king, I don't care. And then he got fucked off to the Caribbean. And then even though it was Harry second in whatever in line, Meghan. So it's American divorced women are they have the most power when it comes to the British monarchy. They can destroy the monarchy. So, do your best. Do it, please. Leave your husbands and go marry British royalty and just fuck it up.
My God. Have y'all ever heard of that show, I Want to Marry Harry?
Oh, Lord, what the fuck?
Okay, so I haven't watched it, but I have it on good authority that this was an American reality show where they hired a Harry lookalike to be on the set, and they got a bunch of women in to compete to marry Harry second in line for the British throne. And had them believing that it was actually him. Only
Americans would not recognize, like,
just gaslight these women into thinking it was girls. It's just some guy.
It's just some ginger they pulled off the fucking street. They're like, you're
gonna
be
Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon. Holy shit. Oh my God. It would be Americans that wouldn't know like what the royal family looks like. If you try to do that in like any other country,
if you told me some rando on the street was Harry, I'd be like, okay, like that's for sure.
So here's my rundown. Harry looks like his head got stuck in a jar and he's got red hair. William looks like if somebody put horse genes in a human.
And his hairline, he's got the Joe Biden hair going, where it just like disappeared and then somehow got thicker and then disappeared again. Just his hairline is, I'm not one to talk, but his hairline, like I shaved my head. I was like, dude, come on. Like that hairline just ran away from you. You need to fucking shave. Like be a bald king. Do it. Be a bald king.
But oh my, so yeah, like the national kind of idea of how things are going is that I watched live on the BBC while the news, like I turned the BBC on about 3 minutes after the first like news bulletin went out, and within like 10 minutes like thousands of people just flooded into, there's a big paved area in front of Buckingham Palace, just thousands of people just want like imagine a zombie apocalypse where people just kind of flood the streets and wander aimlessly. That's what the front of Buckingham Palace looked like. Just thousands of people just flowing into this area. And then when they announced the death of the monarch, they put one piece of paper on the gate, the front fence that goes around it. It's massive, like 20 foot fence that goes around this place. And it's one piece of paper with the announcement and a black line around it. And I like, it made me think of like, those guys that go out and they zip tie signs under like road signs saying like, we'll buy your house for cash. It looked like that.
I was going to say, someone typed it out in Comic Sans and put it on. The queen is dead.
A crying, not even an emoji, like the old style where you had to type in a smiley face, crying one of them.
Just a frowny face.
Oh man.
But yeah, like I went out with a friend that same night, like a couple hours after we got the announcement, and I texted her like, hey, are you sure you want to go out? Like, I don't know how, like, what's gonna happen, basically. Like, I didn't think people were gonna like bomb shit or anything, but it's like there was talk about like what kind of businesses close, what happens afterwards. And she literally was like, yeah, everything should be fine. So we just sat in a Starbucks for 3 hours. That's the like your average white Brit's temperament right now, is sit in a Starbucks and talk about it for about 15 minutes.
No wailing like Kennedy or Elvis died, or
oh no, there's plenty of them.
Hysterical.
Plenty of them. I just don't know them. Like I think I've cut all of the monarchists out of my life.
That's so weird that in today's age you'd be like, oh yes, the monarchists. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, and a scary amount of Americans at that. A
All
scary amount.
I know is the Queen got 1776. Woo! we don't care if she's dead because we kicked their asses back in the day, and we don't need them no more.
Tell that to the rest of the Americans who seem to think like she's their grandmother for some reason.
If there's something Americans are really good at, it's licking boots. So, you know,
Yeah,
that
that's true.
applies to the royal family too.
And caring about other leaders when our own are just completely fucked.
I mean, I did kind of explain my own theory about this in our private Discord that you need to join our Patreon to be part of. But like I said my own thing in there, but then I had to add in like not only are all of these like sociological reasons, but also the royal family has a shit ton of gold and houses and big cars. So
Diamonds.
that's
They're
America's
ours now.
dream.
They're ours now.
They're
The queen is dead.
The Queen is dead. It's in the Magna Carta. That was in the deal when Cornwallis surrendered. It's like
The people's houses.
I don't know who the Magna Carta is, but if that's the one.
I don't know who that Magna Carta is, but I'll tell you what.
Jimmy Carter's other brother.
We don't talk about him. I'm so glad that I you know what, as we were doing this, before we get into what the show is about, I'm reminded of that one jackass that said on Facebook that he didn't like the fact that we talked too much before we got into the episode. So I'm glad. This one's for you, asshole. I hope we're not timestamping this shit, so you're gonna have to hit that fucking forward 10-second shit until you find it, you son of a bitch. Anyway.
It seems like he's won because it seems like you're a little heated.
It's probably more. No, what I've noticed is if someone complains, there's like 10 or 15 people out there that think the same thing. This is all for you. Just like the John Brown episode was for y'all, you little piggies. This one's for us. Go fuck yourself. Chelsea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great episode. All right, y'all. Dixieland.
See ya.
But you are here to talk about one of the greatest people probably in the American labor movement. So Mother Jones, obviously. The only I
was going to say, can you remind me? Because I actually forgot what I was supposed to talk about today. So.
That wouldn't be the first time that happened on this show.
yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. I have to say that I didn't know who Mother Jones was, and I thought that it was just a cool newspaper name for the longest time. And then I actually started looking into labor history and stuff and figured out who this infamous Mother Jones character was. So Chelsea came to me and asked, like, and we were talking about this, and she was talking about Mother Jones, and we talked about like coming on because apparently Mother Jones came to Alabama. But anyway, Chelsea, this is your episode, so you tell us all we need to know. Just like Chris told us all about John Brown, you're going to tell us about another white person that, for some odd reason, did the right thing for once. So please enlighten
the
us.
original Irish American, if you
that's it. Muted. Done. All right, done.
No, so the newspaper is actually named after Mother Jones because she did a lot.
No way. I never would have guessed.
Well, Jones is not, it's like a common name, right? We've got like 10 Jones families here. No, but because she did a lot of like infiltrating as like one of the labor organizers, we're going to talk about that. And she would like snoop in these factories, right? She would like find a way in, look at the conditions, and then try to expose those, especially around like child labor. So that's like why the newspaper is named after her, or magazine, whatever. So as a storyteller, to give us an idea of the legacy of Mother Jones, I would like to start us off with one of her own quotes. She has a lot of good ones, so I'm just going to give you the whole string of them. No, I'm just giving you one. She said, "I am not afraid of the pen, the sword, or the scaffold. I will tell the truth wherever I please." And that really was her legacy, which was also reflected in the way that socialist newspapers would talk to her, as she was literally referred to as the most successful organizer and sustainer of strikes in the country. There is only one Mother Jones, was said by the one of the socialist newspapers. Like Clara Barton has her work of mercy, Susan B. Anthony has equal suffrage, Mother Jones has her boys, the great patient army that sweats and strives and suffers wherever there is work to be done. This is the time of Mother Jones. So we are gonna start at the beginning because she really is the original Irish American. And the origins of Mother Jones, which are just like really important for us understanding why she ended up being a white person doing halfway decent things and building this really powerful legacy. So she was actually born on May 1st. Ironically enough, that would later become International Workers' Day in 1830 in a cottage near Cork, Ireland. Her family was super poor. They had been simple Irish peasants for generations. They were also proud and defiant. And as a child, she was actually born into the time following the Great Famine of the early 1800s. And so she was firsthand witnessing the violence of the Irish fight for freedom following that famine. She saw British troops march through the streets with the heads of Irish folks stuck on their bayonets. She saw her own paternal grandfather hung during the fight for Irish freedom, and her father was forced to flee the country because of his agitation during the fight. And so when he fled to Canada, he established citizenship. He was able to then bring Mary, her mother, and her siblings into the country to join him in 1838-ish in Toronto. And he was working on the railroads at the time. And so from like her very beginning, she's always been described as like very studious, obedient, hardworking. She went on to school. She was where she became like a talented debater of some kind, I guess. And then she grew up from being this like studious, obedient kiddo among this time of revolution to be a young woman who was described as very like ambitious and adventurous. And she ended up dabbling in everything from teaching in public schools to being a dressmaker. She's a secular teacher in Catholic schools at one point, and eventually her teaching career took her to Memphis, Tennessee, where she met and married George E. Jones, an iron molder, in 1861. So George was a big union guy, and Mary learned a lot from him about unionism and the psychology of the working man. And she ended up spending a lot of time in her later life, like trying to help other women understand what she had learned, specifically the idea that wives have to be bought into the union efforts to support their husbands in the workforce if they were actually going to be able to remain resolute. And while this is like all from the perspective of heteronormative capitalist nuclear family stuff, I can say even as like a queer working class parent that that's actually really profound, because for me in this work that I do firsthand, it's like been much more sustainable and possible for me to throw myself into community organizing with the support and buy-in of my own partner, who does really help pick up the slack that I drop, and who deals with my erratic schedule and like crazy ass tangents about capitalism all the time. So this is just like a really important point, and I think a perspective that hadn't been brought into the labor movement up to that point, and it comes back in later. So anyways, I digress. Her life was relatively good, with her being a school teacher, her husband being an iron maker. They had 4 kids in 6 years. And then in 1867, a hot and humid summer in Memphis brought an unusually rainy spring, which produced millions of disease-bearing mosquitoes, resulting in a severe attack of cholera following the town's 3rd epidemic of yellow fever that had happened in a decade. And of course, as we see in our current pandemic, much like it is now, at the time, the victims of the health crisis were mainly poor folks, essential workers. And meanwhile, the rich and well-to-do folks had access to resources that made it possible for them to just like skedaddle, isolate, and avoid exposure. And so Mary Jones' family was, of course, among those poor and working folks, and they lived in an Irish-American section of Memphis that was known as the Pinch area, which was particularly hard hit by the disease. And I was not super familiar with yellow fever, but I was like, I have to know every detail because I have ADHD, so let me go on a side rabbit hole here. And it's a like really fucking brutal disease. Like the victim's eyes turn yellow, and then the victim turns yellow all over, and then the yellow like gets like splotchy with black, and then as like it progresses, they start vomiting black, and their body just like smells really horrible while they're still alive. And so in less than 3 months' time in 1867, the plague had claimed more than 200 Memphis lives, including the lives of George Jones and all 4 of Mary's children. So within the span of a week, Mary Harris Jones had become, at age 37, a childless widow. Her husband was recognized by the local 66 Iron Molders International Union, and Mary stayed on through the rest of the epidemic to nurse other victims of the disease, although somehow I guess she survived. Everyone else fucking died, but she's like taking care of them and she's good to go. And then she leaves for Chicago to get back to dressmaking. And so While she's in Chicago, Mary would describe doing sewing work for the lords and barons who lived in these magnificent houses on the Lakeshore Drive. And then she would describe like looking out of these plate glass windows and seeing poor, just shivering folks, jobless and hungry, walking along the frozen lakefront. And she noticed that the contrast of their condition with the comfort of the people that she was working for was just really almost unfathomable to her. And so she's making these observations, and then, in case it wasn't clear enough from her birth in Ireland at the time when her people were being brutalized, or the sudden and tragic loss of her family, it gets worse, and it's said that tragedy was the shadow of Mary Harris Jones. In 1871, less than half a decade after the death of her entire family, the Great Chicago Fire took place. The fire that consumed about 18,000 buildings, including Mary's home and dressmaking shop on Washington Street. So, facing tragedy yet again, Mary finds herself huddled among the crowds of the people that she used to look out and see from these plate glass windows. And she was wandering from the lakefront to church basements. And that is when she stumbled upon a meeting of the Noble Order of the Knights of Labor, taking place in an old, tumbled down, fire-scorched building. So from there, she started going to these gatherings every night, and she found herself answering this self-proclaimed call to aid the poor and oppressed that was brought to life really by the speakers that she was hearing at these union events. And in her words, she was saying like, those were the days of sacrifice for the cause of labor. They didn't have any halls. There were no high salaried officers. There wasn't any like negotiations happening with business owners. Those were really just the days of like, they were fucking fighting for their survival. So the ashes of Chicago and the tragedies of Memphis left Mary a homeless, childless widow. And from that moment forward, when she was asked where she lived, she would answer, wherever there is a fight. And in lieu of a family, she would adopt America's workers, and they would call her mother. And so that is how Mary Harris, born in Ireland, became the American legend known as Mother Jones. And I think the context, I think the story of Mother Mary Jones requires context, because the role that she played in the history of the labor movement is really like the result of the perfect storm of events. It's almost too perfectly like serendipitous to be attributed to coincidence. The sum of the events of her own life, including everything I just shared, the roots, her firsthand experience with the revolution, growing up poor, the tragedies, her late husband's fervent unionism that really introduced her to this concept before she ran into the Knights of Labor. All those things combined with the external events that were taking place, the founding of the Knights of Labor, the transition of the country from an agrarian economy to an industrial one, and the way that that was really altering the nature of work and workers. And it all made the perfect kind of container for her to step into the role where she was able to fan the flames of class conflict and really serve as an anchor into the past, and simultaneously kind of direct folks as an arrow towards a better future. And for context, speaking of queens, this was a woman who was born 7 years before Queen Victoria ascended to the throne, and less than 50 years following the end of the American Revolution, and then who died on the eve of the New Deal. So that's like the span of her lifetime, right? She was alive when Andrew Jackson was president. She was also alive to hear Lincoln himself make speeches that she would then quote from in her labor organizing. In her adulthood, she saw the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and World War I. She was alive for the moment that the railroads connected the oceans in this country. She watched unions develop from secret groups of hunted men into what she would fear, and rightfully so if you ask me, were becoming complacent parts of the establishment order. She spanned an incredible era, usually remembered for its advancements and revered as a good time in this country's history, but really it was a time when workers were fighting for their survival, and Mary Jones was a critical part of that. Y'all did an episode on John Brown recently, which was naturally one of Mary Jones' own heroes. And like Brown, Jones was described as having a singleness of purpose, a personal fearlessness, and a contempt for established wrongs. Like with Brown, the purpose was the moving force, and the means of accomplishing the end did not matter. It's also, though, important to note before we get into some specific labor events that Mother Jones was a walking, talking contradiction. She was an outrageously irreverent Catholic, a conservative radical, a gregarious individualist, and an ascetic who eschewed the very comforts that she sought for her boys. She was a benevolent fanatic, a Celtic blend of sentiment and fire, of sweetness and fight. Despite being a pioneer of social change, she was adamantly opposed to women's suffrage. She helped found several radical groups, which she almost unfailingly would walk away from every time. She had no consistent philosophy except for altruism, self-sacrifice, and economic betterment. She was also not known for being super truthful. She tended to exaggerate stories, so it's really hard to know what pieces of her own story have been embellished unless you have other people's accounts or like look for those. And so after the Chicago fire, it isn't super well known what her steps were because she wasn't well known yet. And it seems like she may have like stayed in the city for a little while, continued to work as a seamstress for a couple of years, and then potentially made her way to San Francisco, where supposedly she became acquainted with the growing socialist movement there, and where she more than likely fought to exclude Chinese immigrants from the labor market because they were being used to undermine labor organizers, to lower wages, and maintain shitty working conditions. But of course, that doesn't make it any less racist that she was doing those things. So all of this brings us to the 1870s. She ended up returning to Chicago after a time traveling, doing whatever. And it was there that she started re-engaging with the local Knights of Labor activities and befriended the leader of the group. And so in September of 1873, in the middle of a bunch of speculation following the war, the banking house of J. Cook and Company suffered losses that led to them closing their doors. And this brought on a chain reaction of failures among smaller banks. And so overnight, the entire credit structure of the nation collapsed. 5,000 businesses fell by the end of the year, and the country suffered the worst depression that it had known up to that time. I wouldn't know anything about what this looks like as a millennial. It's definitely not like this is a cycle for our country or anything. Very surprising to read about this. So in the years of that depression, unemployment skyrocketed, wages plummeted, which obviously made it really hard for unions to survive, because if there's no work for the workers, how do you unionize them? So of the 30 national labor organizations that had existed in 1873, only about 8 or 9 remained by 1877. And of those, they still lost a huge number of their members. But unemployed workers were organizing mass demonstrations on the regular. And there were still a decent number of railroad workers, but those, of course, were living in shanties, working 15 to 18 hours a day on average, weekly earnings of like $5 to $10. And so they had had enough of that, and they were joining these unemployed workers in strikes. And the economy's regular employment had already made their wages pretty unreliable because they could pull in these unemployed workers to like undermine strike efforts, right? And so they were forced to endure earlier wage cuts, along with like Pinkerton spies being sent in and blacklisting of union organizers to counter any unionizing attempts. And so when another financial panic happened and the Pennsylvania Railroad cut wages by another 10% in 1877, along with all of the other rail lines who followed their lead, that lit the match and gave the labor movement the spark that it needed to ignite. Underground unions surfaced, strikes, slowdowns, confrontations started popping up at every major rail center. And that in West Virginia, thousands of workers seized depots and halted traffic between Baltimore and Ohio. Crowds of strikers in West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania blocked tracks and successfully prevented the scabs from running the trains. The West Virginia governor tried to send in state militia, and the troops said, "Fuck you," and joined with the striking workers, at which point the governor had to turn to the president and request federal troops, setting a unfortunate and much used precedent for the use of United States military in suppressing labor efforts during global peacetime. So anyways, the labor uprising spread to Ohio, Kentucky, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Missouri, and California. Whole railroads were closed down, and the intensity of the uprising was peaking in Pittsburgh, where the people were crowding to the tracks. And it was there in Pittsburgh that Mother Jones arrived in July, just before an event took place where Philadelphia state soldiers fired into a crowd of demonstrators, killing 20 civilians and seriously hurting dozens more. An infuriated Pittsburgh crowd of about 20,000 then forced the soldiers to retreat into a roundhouse that was then set on fire The troops were forced to shoot their way out as they were surrounded by smoke and flame and angry crowd members. Federal troops were sent in by August in their first official decisive strike-breaking role. Thanks for nothing, Grover Cleveland, putting an end to the class uprisings of Pittsburgh and sending a quieting ripple effect through all of the other cities. Mother Jones described the impact that this event had on her, and the main thing that she learned from it after the strikebreakers were charged with arson and rioting, even though it was known that Pittsburgh businessmen had started the fire. Her takeaway was essentially, the law isn't on our side. They will always find a way to punish us for the crimes of the rich and powerful. Again, she was always inconsistent, so it wouldn't stay that way. We're going to come back to this. So that event in Pittsburgh was really the first big moment to guide Mother Jones' early labor learnings. And the second big event to impact Mother Jones' early labor learnings was the Haymarket Square Riot of 1886. How familiar are we with this?
Yay.
Yay. Tell me what you know. I want to hear a little bit of y'all's take on the Haymarket event. Assume your listeners know nothing.
Someone threw a bomb and blew up some cops, and then some people got hanged for it, and it became May Day.
Yes. Exactly that. Essentially, the central demand around which the Haymarket event was organized, along with strikes across the world and across the country on May 1st, was the demand for the 8-hour workday. And there was tens of thousands of folks who were striking in Chicago. People got hurt and got killed. So then on May 4th, there was a call to meet and respond to the overreach of police. And at this meeting, police showed up. They were trying to shut down the event. A bomb exploded. No one knows who the bomb belonged to. There were 8 Union anarchist leaders who were charged and sentenced to death. And as a result, what happened was it really sent a chill through the labor movement efforts in the United States, right? We actually ended up getting Labor Day because the president was worried that he wouldn't get the worker vote in the upcoming presidential election as a result of squashing the labor movement around the Haymarket event. And so during this time, Mother Jones was really a strong proponent of the 8-hour workday, and she attended some anarchist meetings, but she never identified herself with those anarchist groups. She was pretty critical of some of their more confrontational tactics, they would do these parades just outside of rich folks' houses, and she was like, oh, this is just antagonistic, it's just going to make rich people angrier without actually resulting in any outcomes for the workers. As someone who lives in Madison Cawthorn's district, I 100% endorse the use of parades outside of rich people's houses. I'm down for that. So when the anarchist leaders were executed after the Haymarket riot, Mary Jones was really heavily impacted by the death of those organizers and what she considered to be a reign of terror that was being perpetuated on working folks. She said the workers' cry for justice was drowned in the shriek for revenge. She would later speak of the Haymarket martyrs with just an abundance of reverence, and she would praise the intervention of Governor Alked for freeing the remaining anarchists from prison 6 years later, the ones who had not been executed or otherwise died because one killed himself. So that was the second big event in Mother Jones' life. The third big event to impact Mother Jones' early labor learnings was the Verdun Massacre of 1898. So this situation was triggered because some South Central Illinois coal operators felt like there was just no way they could operate under the wage rates that had been established in a fair agreement between labor and management earlier that year. So they appealed for an exemption from these rates. They were denied. And then some companies responded by locking out their unionized workers and importing Black workers from Alabama to break the strike. Always, always, always pitting us against each other to protect their profit and undermine our ability to collectively organize. So angry, displaced miners filled the streets towns in preparation for the arrival of the strike breakers. And when a trainload of 180 Black workers steamed past the depot, gunfire erupted. Shots were exchanged by guards inside a protective stockade that had been built around this mine, as well as guards inside the train and miners who were armed with shotguns and hunting rifles. The gunfire killed at least 7 miners and 5 guards and wounded more than 40 other folks, along with the train engineer who refused to unload the strike breakers. What's up?
Point of interest, Madam Speaker.
Yeah.
So we talked about that in the first episode that we ever did. On the coal mining in the Battle of Blair Mountain, and I found an article called "It Ain't Your Color, It's Your Scabbing," and what happens in these situations, because Frederick Douglass was very outspoken about how black workers should not stand with white workers when their black workers were excluded from unions because of racism. He was like, we have no obligation to stand with white workers that exclude us from the unions. But what would happen, it wasn't just they would go and find, because what they would do, they'd find black coal miners in Birmingham who already knew, like through the CIO and like other organizations and Knights of Labor, et cetera, that were organizing their own the mines in Birmingham, right? And so what they would do is these mine owners would send people down to the deep South, especially like I said, Birmingham, and get black coal miners, and they would say, hey, we got these new mines that are opening up above the Mason-Dixon line. You won't have to deal with like these, cousin fucking racists down here and all the Jim Crow bullshit if you come up to Indiana or you come up to Idaho or anywhere that they would lie and say, hey, we have these new mines that are open and we need workers. Because the misconception is that like black workers didn't know about, I know this is not what you're saying, but like the misconception for the masses, right? People in history think that black workers didn't understand labor unions. No, they did. They had their own unions because they were excluded from labor unions due to racism. And so they would get tricked and told that they were going to come to these new mines without being told that they were going to be used as scabs to break these strikes. And what happens a lot of time, especially in Vernon, afterwards, when the black coal miners showed up and got the shit kicked out of them by these angry white workers, Vernon becomes a sundown town. And like all the black people that did live in Vernon were forced to leave, and it stayed that way for generations. So what like the backstory to like these events, especially, I just know about this one specifically because we talked about it in that first episode we ever did, was that they got black coal miners from Birmingham, sent them to Vernon, saying that these are new mines. You won't have to deal with cousin fucking racists. And the Klan anymore was a big one, that you don't have to deal with the Klan anymore, because the Klan, one, hated them because they were black, and two, hated them because they were organizing labor unions. So they like, you don't have to deal with them. They get on the train and they show up to like foaming at the mouth, angry, racist white coal miners that just want to kill them because they're scabs. They didn't know they were going to be used as scabs. So like it does go back to mining companies and mine owners like pitting us against each other. But I just wanted to touch on that nuance because it's a lot more in depth, which everything is in U.S. history, than just pitting two members of the working class against each other. It was like the white working class already had their bullshit going on and would exclude, like you said, Chinese workers and black workers, etc., and then would lie to them and say, hey, come to these new places where you don't have to deal with the racists, and then not knowing that they're going to get shit kicked out of them when they got there.
Yeah, thanks for raising that nuance. I forget that, like, so my whole podcast, for context, is like I bring out this thread of like race and labor and how folks have been lied to or intentionally exploited, or they have like they being like the rich and powerful have used like language and cultural barriers to prevent folks from fully being able to make informed consensual decisions around like what you're exactly saying, Nelson. Like, oh, they didn't actively choose to participate in undermining union efforts. They were literally used as like pawns for profit. And so I forget that, like, in the context of this conversation, folks have not heard my other episodes of my podcast. And so please go listen to them so that you understand more of the nuance related to this too.
And ours was like literally 70 episodes ago, so they probably forgot about that.
Yeah, so important to bring up. And yeah, 100%. I think that this was also intended to give the ruling class, like the ruling class knew what they were doing too, in that they knew that they were planting seeds that they would be able to later draw on for racial tension, right? Like they would be able to be like, oh, well, now look, all of these planting the seeds for sundown towns, right? Like all of exactly what you just described. And so I didn't read and I'll share the books and stuff that I read when I was preparing for this episode. If y'all want to put them in show notes or anything like that, you're welcome to. I didn't read exactly like which of the workers were Black that were killed versus which were white. I know that the train engineer did refuse to unload the strike breakers because he like was not going to let them out into the middle of this like gunfire essentially. So the gunfire killed at least 7 miners and 5 guards. Again, I don't know which of those were white, which of those were Black. Like more than 40 folks were injured. And then the Union miners went on to attack the company store and nearly killed the store manager in the process. And so after about 6 months, the company surrendered and secured a victory for the Union. And the reason that this was another major point in Mother Jones' life was because of really the devotion and the outright rejection of compromise by the miners, that she was just like, she really admired how persistent they were in their fight and how they weren't going to be turned away by all of these tactics that were being used by the company owners. And so her first coal strike was actually apparently in Norton, Virginia in the early 1890s. And during her time in Norton, Mary Jones' attempts to organize were met with a lot of retaliation from company officials. This is the other thing about like mine union efforts is like company officials they had no ethical boundaries. Like they would use violence, they would lie to people, they would do whatever they needed to. And so she would be barred from meeting halls and churches. She would be arrested. She would be forced to use the public highway as the only option for a meeting ground. And as a reminder, like all of this so 1891 is when she was in Virginia, and 1890 is the year that the United Mine Workers Union, the UMW, was formed as a merger of other union groups. And this was the union that, despite the weird and wild journey that she went on through her life, this was the union that received most of her attention in her organizing. And she would go on to be involved in strikes across minefields from West Virginia to Pittsburgh, Virginia to Colorado, Indiana, Ohio, Alabama, Arizona, Michigan. And she played a part in some of the most prominent mine worker uprisings throughout our country's history. So after her first coal strike in Virginia, she went down to Alabama to another coal strike in 1894. And that is when she got involved on the fringes of what would come to be known as Deb's Rebellion, or the Pullman Strike. I can imagine y'all have talked about this in some of your episodes. Really? Oh my gosh. Okay. So Eugene Debs founded the American Railway Union to unify all of the railroad employees under a single union and prevent division that had ultimately led to the union's losses in the past. And so about 4,000 of the ARU's members were employed by George Pullman, inventor of the railway sleeping car and one of the nation's most powerful industrialists, and the sole employer and landlord in Pullman, Illinois. Outside of Chicago, it was widely advertised as a model community. What does that mean under white supremacist capitalism? I don't want to know. Average daily wage was 90 cents and monthly rent was $12 or so. Employees were subject to blacklisting, favoritism, saloons and unions, and the 8-hour day were all banned. Wages would be cut, costs would increase, or at best stay the same. One worker described framing his paycheck after deductions. The paycheck amounted to 2 cents. So in May of 1894, the workers organized around a reduction in rent costs, a return to former wage levels, improvement in working conditions, and 3 of the grievance committee members were fired in retaliation. So then 2,000 Pullman workers decided to strike, and in support of that, it was decided to boycott the Pullman shops in St. Louis and in Ludlow, Kentucky, and to pull the union members off of Pullman cars. The boycott then spread through central and western United States. The boycott turned into a strike as railroads tried to discharge the boycotters. More than 150,000 workers ended up being off the job as a result of this strike. 15 railroads got tied up, 30 people were killed, twice as many were injured during direct actions, and at least 700 people were arrested during the Pullman strike. So when the strike began, Mother Jones was in Birmingham, where there were about 8,000 UMW coal miners striking against wage cuts and poor living and working conditions, the usual. And their strike ended up being broken up by the state militia. And then a few months later, when Eugene Debs was being released from jail in Illinois due to his shenanigans with the Pullman strike, he came down to Birmingham. And the city officials in Birmingham were like, no, we know who you are, buddy. Like, we're not going to let you speak here. You're not going to get all these workers riled up in our neck of the woods.
We don't take too kindly to folks like you around here.
I know, but you know what? We rowdy folks never give up. According to Mother Jones, she forced the town officials. Again, we don't know how honest she is. So she forced the town officials to change their mind after she organized a show of force where workers crowd surfed Debs essentially on their shoulders through the town. So as you can imagine, Eugene Debs and Mother Jones hit it off real strong. And the thing is, if y'all haven't talked about Eugene Debs at length in any of your episodes, I would encourage you to like have someone who's way more knowledgeable than me come on and do that, because apparently he's my favorite kind of organizer. Not an intellectual, not a theorist, not a politician, but just like Mother Jones had that true grit, real poor working class type, like we Appalachians, had compassion and integrity, and that's what made him a good leader, was like that authenticity, that real dedication to the cause. And so they hit it off. After the railroad strike, Mother Jones stayed in Alabama and then went to Cottondale to work in the cotton mills because she wanted to see if there was any truth in what she had heard about the conditions of those mills. And Nelson's face is hinting that there may be something happening in the mills.
Yeah, they were bad.
They were bad. Nah. The miners and railroad workers had told her what to expect, and she assumed that they were exaggerating. So she decided to see the conditions for herself. Keep in mind, at this point, she has seen the coal mines. She has seen some textile mills up in the north, and she did what all organizers do. She got a job, and she started socializing with the workers and their families, doing a little snooping, Mother Jones style. And the thing was, just to be able to get a job at a cotton mill in the first place, she had to lie. Because at that point in time, about 30% of the Southern cotton mill workers were younger than 16. There were no age limits, literacy, or education requirements or restrictions on night work for children. And so the Cottondale mill boss had actually told Mother Jones she couldn't have a job unless she also had a family to work with her. So she told him that her family, including her 6 non-existent children, would be joining her later. And at that point, the boss enthusiastically helped her find a little shanty to rent with broken windows and a door that wouldn't close. And then inside the mill, she found child labor and what she considered to be essentially slavery for the adults. And she even said that she had the urge to flee. These are her words, quote, "The most heart-rending spectacle in all of life. This is where the labor fight." She wanted to go to the coal fields where the labor fight is at least fought by grown men. She described children 6 and 7 years old being dragged out of bed at 4:30 in the morning, being woken up by the taskmaster's whistle. They would eat breakfast of black coffee and cornbread mixed with cottonseed oil instead of butter, and then trot off to work at 5:30 a.m., work until noon when they would take a 30-minute break, and then they would go back to work until 7 p.m. Then they would march home and swallow a scanty supper, talk for a few minutes about their shared misery, and then collapse onto their beds of straw and sleep until they would be woken up again by the whistle. She described children who were responsible for tending to machinery who would have their limbs torn off and then be thrown out to die when they weren't physically able to work because of their injuries. And when her own 6 non-existent children did not arrive, she had to move on, and then she went on to a Tuscaloosa rope factory before she visited other towns in Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. And during her tour, she made her way to Selma, where she was being boarded by a woman whose 11-year-old daughter had been killed when her hair got caught in the mill machinery and her scalp was torn off. So at this point, despite some of her many contradictions and inconsistencies, Mother Jones became consistently obsessed with a real fucking hatred for child labor and in general the struggles that were experienced by children of workers who couldn't care for their children. So after the South, Mother Jones went to Pittsburgh and later to Omaha, Nebraska. And her experiences with Debs and in the Southern Mill started her thinking and writing about anti-capitalism and how capitalism is the root of all evil, which I totally understand. She ended up doing a lot of written contributions and even helped to start the socialist weekly paper Appeal to Reason. She later would be published in the International Socialist Review. She also published her own autobiography at the end of her life. And there's so many just detailed and powerful, fun, not so fun stories that I could tell about Mother Jones' life. But I figured y'all probably didn't want to be here all night. So
we want to be here all night. So tell us everything.
Okay, so I'm just gonna pull up her autobiography then, and we're gonna read through this together. No,
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1 on a cold, bitter night. I do have a few stories that I picked out that I did think were especially just fun that I wanted to tell. And one of those was about her time in the anthracite mines at the end of the 1890s. For those who aren't familiar, the anthracite mines are in Pennsylvania. And among the workers at that time, there were about 20 nationalities, almost as many languages, which was making union organizing especially difficult. And Jones was then called in to support the strike efforts that were being threatened by the coal operators and all of the division among the varying workers. So October 1st, Mother Jones showed up. She agitates the workers, successfully gets them to reverse a vote that they had made the day before, where they had voted 130 to 19 in favor of returning to work. So 130 to 19, she gets them to reverse it the next day. Then she organized the wives of the strikers, arming them with mops and brooms and pots and pans. And they took their ragtag armor and they would go frighten off the mules that hauled the coal cars and the scab drivers. So she got real creative with her nonviolent direct action here. I was learning a lot about what I want to do at future protests, thanks to Mother Jones as I was reading this. She was described by this guy who his name is John Brophy. He at the time was a 15-year-old coal miner, and he later became a leader of the UMW and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, aka the CIO. And he said she came into the mine one day and talked to us in the vernacular of the mines. How she got in, I don't know. She probably just walked in and defied anybody who tried to stop her. She would take a drink with the boys and spoke their idiom, including some pretty rough language when talking about the bosses. This might have been considered a little fast in ordinary women, but the miners knew and respected her. They might think her a little queer, perhaps. It was an odd kind of work for a woman in those days, but they knew she was a good soul. So Mother Jones gets here, makes her way into the mines, however she did it. And the next year, about 112,000 miners left their jobs on strike. And within 2 weeks of the launch, more workers joined the walkout to bring a full 90% of the anthracite industry to a halt around their demands for a 10% wage increase, a reduction in the price of the equipment that they had to use for work, abolition of the company store, and elimination of the sliding wage price scale. She then organized a series of marches and put on shows of force at the mines that were still in operation. The mine operators, in turn, cried out that it was so unfair that the miners who weren't actively complaining would lay down their tools and stop working at the insistence of foreigners like Mother Jones. These people get near our mines. They said they appeal to our workers on a daily and hourly basis in a language that they understand, and they stir up all these passions that have already brought one fatal collision and make all of these conflicts happen. And they were all torn up about this little old Irish lady. Big, big crocodile tears. So Mother Jones keeps on going on. Their tears are fuel for this old woman. She then gathers 5,000 miners near Hazleton in Pennsylvania. She gets their wives to put on kitchen clothes and bring their mops and brooms with them and a couple of tin pans. They proceed to march over the mountains 15 miles, beating tin pans like their symbols, going through the night. They had newspaper reporters, wagons, American flags. They like the whole 9 yards in an effort to gain the support of workers at the 10 collieries in the Panther Creek Valley that weren't yet unionized. And the plan was to arrive at their mine just as they were going to work. So just as the sun came up over the hills, the marchers arrive at the entrance of the Panther Creek mining area, and there they were met by the militia of the Pennsylvania National Guard with their fixed bayonets. The troop commander demanded Mother Jones to turn back, to which she responded, "The American working man never goes backward. We go forward, and we did not go out to go back." He warned her that he would charge, but he didn't. The McAdoo women continued on, and then not only convinced the miners to join the strike, but also got the streetcar men to promise to not haul scabs for the companies at all. Later, 20,000 more miners rallied at Wilkes Barre, and her work kept on going just like that until the anthracite miners, in 6 weeks, which is crazy, won an agreement for a 10% wage increase commitment for 2 years. So then we get to West Virginia. And if there was any place that Mother Jones considered home, it was West Virginia. Over the course of 30 years, she participated in and led 5 major strikes there and many, many other non as well-known strikes. And in the late 1900s, she was intentionally assigned to the challenge of unionizing the coal fields of West Virginia. They had been struggling to unionize the workers there for a long time, and her presence catalyzed the workers with a new sense of motivation. Her brand of organizing was super authentic and personal, and as we already know, it was also very successful. She would speak earnestly, colorfully, in terms and anecdotes that the workers could understand, and she was this sweet old Irish woman in this risky, violent, confrontational business of labor organizing, and she had this flair for drama, and they just loved it. There's this one situation that I was reading about, and I just like took some of her exact words because I thought that they were just really powerful. And she was addressing this crowd of 700 or so West Virginia miners, and she said, quote, "Has anyone ever told you, my children, about the lives you are living here so that you may understand how it is you pass your days on earth? Let us consider this together, for I am one of you, and I know what it is to suffer." She went on to paint the picture of the life of a miner from his boyhood to his old age. She described his introduction to working in dismal caves beneath the earth, dripping with moisture. So low he has to crawl in, lie on his back, and dig. She described him allowing the sulfur water to eat through his shoes and blister his skin. She described for the crowd how the worker's hands had become cracked and gnarled and his nails broken off, how the scraps in his lunch pail failed to satisfy, and how the thought of his barefoot children and their broken mother haunted him even in the bowels of the earth. The worker she described had to scrub the coal dust from his tired body every night, listen to his wife tell of what the children need but can't have. He would never own a home or educate his children. He would rise again tomorrow and again the next day to do it all over. Unless, of course, he was crushed by a rock on the job, she said, or rheumatism crippled him, or the job was yanked out from under him. Mother Jones would describe these things and her voice would get really loud, and she would ask why others, who were no more sons of God than the coal miner, took from the labor of the miner and all the wealth that it produced, leaving the worker with only enough to survive on so that he might further labor to produce their profit. "You pity yourselves," she would say, "but you do not pity your brothers, or you would stand together to help one another." She called on them to wake up and come together so that they could live a better life. So her persistence and determination also made it possible for her to endure what were some fucking brutal conditions in West Virginia organizing and elemental environment. She would walk 5 to 20 miles across the Appalachian Mountains to attend organizing meetings, encountering copperheads, getting lost, walking miles out of her way, having to go back to where she meant to go. Meanwhile, local mine officials would, like I said, notify hotels, have Jones barred from staying or eating anywhere. She would have to search for workers to take her in. If caught, workers on more than one occasion would be evicted from their company housing. Company guards and local elected officials attacked organizers, and the powers that be would throw the law at them at every chance. in Mother Jones' own words, in West Virginia, you can't step on a piece of ground without you stepping on an injunction. In June of 1902, a strike was called for the entire state, and more than 16,000 miners across 15 counties in West Virginia walked out of their jobs, adding them to the ranks of miners in Pennsylvania, Alabama, and Michigan who were also striking. Mother Jones got sent up north to manage food supplies for the strikers in northern West Virginia coal fields, and then when the Union commander of those coal fields was arrested, Mother Jones assumed command. She successfully maintained a series of public demonstrations and succeeded in temporarily closing down one mine, but she struggled with, big surprise, Nelson, convincing the Italians to quit, who were a huge fucking part of the workforce.
First off, fuck you. Second, first off, I'm having to deal with some. First off, okay, I'm having to listen for like close to 2 hours about some Irish lass going around getting workers organized, and now you throw in this
reparations for this shit your ancestors pulled, my dude.
First off, okay. I'm gonna
You've said first off about 50 times now. You're at 50 off now. Decide what you're gonna fucking say.
Going.
You're all muted.
Good fucking luck.
You'll never shut me up.
Don't forget, I have the editor on my side.
That is true. All right, this episode's scrapped. Just not sending the files.
Canceled by
Canceled.
all of a sudden the Zoom just shuts off. The host has ended the call.
Oh man.
What you got to say for yourself, Nelson?
Yeah, I'm like, are you gonna try to explain the actions of people you have no idea who they were, or are we just gonna sit here and
there was obviously a good reason. Okay, there's probably obviously a good reason.
Is it because she's a woman?
No, whoa. First off, okay. I'm at 60 now, Kai. I counted. Okay. If anyone is going to listen to a woman, it's going to be Italians. Okay. We are a mother's boys to the core. Okay. I will admit that 100%. Okay. So for the Italians not wanting to go on strike, it had to be something. Okay. They weren't given like a good cheese ration in their food, whatever. They weren't given wine. They were getting some shitty moonshine. You can't drink that shit. We want
Where's
wine.
the spaghetti?
Exactly. Somebody touching my spaghetti. And there was obviously reasons, probably really good ones that they didn't want to go on strike.
She wasn't a good enough Catholic for you?
Exactly. She's Irish. That's the biggest one.
Oh, that's exact. You just named it. You found the piece.
Good. Good. They shouldn't have fucking
this
went on.
Old Irish lady.
Good. They shouldn't have gone on strike.
He's like that to this day. That's just him.
Good. They shouldn't have, because she was Irish.
Generational trauma, right?
Mamma mia.
So
Mother Jones probably treated the Italians like, the whites treated the black workers, because Italians.
Nelson, shut the fuck up.
He's like, I don't even want y'all in my union.
He probably didn't. She was probably like, oh, those swirly Sicilians and those Dagos.
Then just wrote shit about them in her autobiography. They wouldn't join the fucking union.
Hey, we're not going to join the. We run the union. It's like, we already got the mafia. We don't need no.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh. So she gets put in charge.
Irish.
She gets put in charge. Northern coal fields of West Virginia. The Italians are fucking around. She's keeping these public demonstrations going. And then she addresses like 300 some folks at this schoolhouse in Willow Tree, and then gets served with a writ from the United States District Court Judge John J. Jackson, Judge Triple J. John Jacob Smith.
That's what I was thinking too. His name was going to be John Jacob Jim Smith.
Who was an appointee of Abraham Lincoln. So Judge Triple J granted an injunction banning all meetings and demonstrations by the strikers, even on the premises where they paid to live. So like they'd be like, oh, you rent this house, you pay money to live here. No. You can't like gather union people here. But they said, fuck you. They planned another rally. It was advertised by thousands of handbills that they just passed out all over the place. And on June 20th, near Clarksburg, West Virginia, as Mother Jones delivered a 30-minute speech, a federal marshal just started arresting people in the crowd of attendees. and sent somebody up to Jones to let her know that she was also under arrest. But this little old Irish lady, much like us Appalachians, refused to stop talking until she had her say. And she accused Judge Triple J, along with the railroads and the newspapers, of all being in cahoots with the coal operators. And she ended her speech in this dramatic farewell as she's being carried off by the officers. "Goodbye, boys," she said. "I'm under arrest. I may have to go to jail. I may not see you for a long time. Pay no attention to the injunction machine. The federal judge is a scab anyhow. While you starve, he plays golf. While you serve humanity, he serves injunctions for the money powers." And even though she had put on this big scene, she still got offered a chance to defend herself in front of the courts. And Mother Jones is said to have used that time to again call Judge Triple J a scab and to tell the judge that she had seen her duty, had done it, and she'd do it again. And during her time in jail, the courts attempted to stifle the principal organizers of the labor movement as usual, and they shook up the union efforts in West Virginia, causing new leadership for the union to be sent in. So then Mother Jones leaves the northern West Virginia coal fields to join the anthracite conflict again up north, but it was just a few months before she made her way back to raise more hell in the New River and Kanawha River fields of West Virginia. And when she arrived at a coal camp near Staniford Mountain, she, weirdly enough, chided a group of miners who had driven away a deputy marshal that had been sent to arrest them. And she said, like, even if they weren't guilty, they should not defy arrest. So this is a weird 180, kind of a contradiction of where she was before. She convinced them to go to court the next day to surrender. And this is why we should only let abolitionists be union organizers. And I'm only kind of kidding. The next morning, after talking with those workers, Mother Jones said that she went to visit them before they went to turn themselves in. And at the first miner's cabin, she pushed open their door. She described, on a mattress wet with blood lay a miner. His brains had been blown out while he slept. His shack was riddled with bullets, and 5 other shacks men also lay dead. While the men had slept, the deputy marshal had gathered an 80-man posse and swept down on the homes of the miners, killing at least 7 and wounding dozens more. And that crime, of course, went unpunished. To which I ask, what good is a court system that only holds consequences for those who already lack power and influence? Fuck the police. In October of 1902, the union did win an agreement in the Kanawha Valley covering some 7,000 miners, recognizing their union along with an 9-hour workday, dues checkoff, semi-monthly paydays, some other stuff. It was a huge success that was largely attributed to Mother Jones. But the violence, the all-encompassing injunctions, evictions, use of armed guards and strike breakers, the yellow dog contracts ultimately triumphed all but the rest of the state, where the UMW not only failed to win recognition that it sought, but it lost most of the ground that they had previously organized. So she heads back up north shortly after confronting Judge Triple J. And in the anthracite mines, there were all of these new strikes and conferences happening up there about a new demand for a 20% wage increase, reduction in hours, and the right to bargain, with the union being the bargaining agent for the miners. So the strikes were causing this shortage of hard coal. And as a result, the price of anthracite at that time, which was usually like $5 or $6 a ton, was as high as $15 or $20. And widespread suffering was forecast for the approaching winter because this is heat, right? So Roosevelt was referring to this threat as not merely a calamity, but the direst disaster. And he was super concerned about the effect that it was going to have on the 1902 congressional election, not on the people of the country, but on the election. And of course, on his own re-election campaign that would be following that. And this was the first time that a union was able to tie up a strategic industry without being condemned as a revolutionary threat. Roosevelt did not follow in Grover Cleveland's footsteps and send in troops to squash the labor movement, although he did consider having the troops take over the mines as a last resort. But luckily for him, a behind-the-scenes argument was reached between one of Roosevelt's representatives and a financier, guess who? J.P. Morgan. And Roosevelt named a commission to settle the strike. Mother Jones rightfully was not a fan of this third-party settlement. She didn't see this as a victory. She didn't see Roosevelt as a friend of labor, and she carried the bitterness of the Union leaders' acceptance of this deal till her dying day. Then she heads, or she's still in Philadelphia, and at the same time, there's 100,000 workers who leave their jobs. 16,000 of them are kids under 16. Their demands and the reason they were leaving is for a 55-hour work week instead of a 60-hour work week. Big ask there, right? We already know that child labor was a big no-no in MJ's book. So she decides to parade a number of children to City Hall. I put little boys with their fingers off and hands crushed and maimed on a platform. I held up their mutilated hands and showed them to the crowd and made the statement that Philadelphia's mansions were built on the broken bones, the quivering hearts, and drooping heads of these children. I called up the millionaire manufacturers to cease their moral murders, and I cried to the officials in the open windows opposite, someday the workers will take possession of your City Hall. And when we do, no child will be sacrificed on the altar of profit. When this march on City Hall didn't catch all the attention that she needed or wanted, she decided to march the mill children to Roosevelt's home on Long Island, about 125 miles away. The children sang and talked as they walked. They were really happy to be out of the factories and mills, to be in the sunshine and fresh air, to not be working, but it was also peak summer. It was really fucking hot. And within 3 days, she lost 2/3 of her marchers. And the numbers just continued to dwindle as they got further into their journey, but they did not give up. By the time her army went across the Delaware River Bridge, they were 52 people strong. And in front of a crowd of 5,000 in Delaware's Monument Park, she asked, what is the use of bringing children into the world to make more money for plutocrats to live, or for plutocrats while their little lives are being ground out in the mill and workshop? Supposedly, when the group of ragtag child laborers, accompanied by this old Irish grandma, arrived in the home of former President Grover Cleveland near Princeton, the Clevelands were on vacation at Buzzard Bay, and the caretaker invited all these cute little boys and girls to come right on in. So Mother Jones just enthusiastically accepted the use of their barn as a makeshift dormitory for their journey. Thanks, President Cleveland. And during her shenanigans in Philadelphia, she was asked by a Princeton professor to speak to his class. And so she took one of the child laborers in, paraded him in front of the students, and said, here is a textbook on economics. He gets $3 a week, and his sister, who's 14, gets $6. They work in a carpet factory 10 hours a day, while the children of the rich are getting their higher education. Saying this to a bunch of rich kids in a Princeton classroom. So the group endured rain-soaked tents while they camped along their route, mosquitoes that would raid after the rains ended. They would go through heat, rainstorms, and yet everywhere they stopped, they would be met by crowds of thousands, and they would receive just extraordinary hospitality from those who had it to give. They even managed to acquire an elephant loaned to them by the animal show at Coney Island before they set out to persuade U.S. Senator Thomas C. Platt to arrange an audience with the president. But apparently the senator was already on a train leaving town before they made it there. Weird how that happens. On Wednesday, July 29th, after 22 days of marching, a party of 6, including 3 young mill workers, arrived at Oyster Bay. They were denied entry to the president by the Secret Service, and they were told by the secretary that the president had no authority to act on child labor matters. That was a states' rights issue. The president confirmed this, to which Mother Jones would later say, he's a brave guy when he wants to take a gun out and fight other grown people, but when those children went to see him, he couldn't even look at them. So she gets denied by the president, and after all of her shenanigans there, she eventually was sent out west to Colorado in order to investigate the conditions of the Southern Colorado mines. I don't know a ton about the labor uprisings out west, but what I know from what I read is that the UMW ended up calling a strike, and the southern miners of Colorado were effectively betrayed by the northern miners, who accepted a settlement from the companies that effectively ended the coal shortage that the South really needed to win their demands. And so Mother Jones saw the southern striking miners really just suffering, living in tents through the cold Colorado winter while the union leadership was celebrating what she didn't think was a victory. And the actions of the UMW during the Colorado miners' strike ended up leading Mother Jones to resign from her position with them in 1904. And she spent several years after that working as a lecturer for the Socialist Party of America at the same time that Eugene V. Debs ran for president with the party in 1904, securing 400,000 votes. She traveled through Montana, Missouri, Texas, Arizona, what was known as the Indian Territory then, but is known as Oklahoma now. She gave speeches about socialism and the rights of workers. And when she wasn't presenting lectures, she was working with railroad workers to support their efforts for union recognition and collective bargaining. This woman was just all fucking over the place, doing a little bit of everything for the cause. So then in January of 1905, radical labor leaders called for a secret meeting in Chicago to decide how workers could successfully control more of the country's industries. They wanted workers to own industry themselves so that they could participate in making decisions about their work. Mother Jones was invited to the meeting by none other than Big Bill Haywood, a miner and union organizer for the Western Federation of Miners, who she met during her time in Colorado. And Bill's experiences in Colorado had led him to believe that trade-specific unions like the UMW and the WFM could never be strong enough to help working people. He and the other meeting organizers in Chicago wanted to see one big union that would include all working people. At that meeting were 27 socialists, radical labor leaders, and reporters, and Mother Jones was the only woman among them. At their second meeting in June, 186 delegates from many unions and workers groups came together to form the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, the Wobblies. And until World War I, the Wobblies grew their membership successfully to nearly 300,000 workers. And these were the poorest workers, the workers who had no other union to turn to. They fought for higher wages, safer workplaces, fair treatment. They fought to defend free speech so that radical organizers could speak to workers without being arrested. They favored conflict and confrontation over collective bargaining, and they wanted a huge general strike that would overthrow the entire capitalist system. Some of these things, I know, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we need. Yet these were exactly some of the things that led Mother Jones, Debs, and other socialist leaders to step away from the organization because they're like, oh, we can negotiate. We can negotiate from the rich. They'll give us power nicely. But Mother Jones did not lose touch with Big Bill Haywood. As soon as she saw the news that Big Bill Haywood was being held in jail on accusations of killing the former governor of Idaho, she hopped herself on a train and she spent over a year traveling around the country making speeches in support of Haywood and his co-defendants and collecting money for their defense. And it was that money that enabled them to hire one of the most famous and respected trial lawyers in the country, who was able to prove the men to be innocent as decided by the jury. At some point in the years after, while in Arizona doing God knows what, Mother Jones just by happenstance crossed paths with Manuel Sarabia. I'm going to say that my Appalachian accent. I'm like fucking butchering this. Sorry, y'all. He was one of the leaders of the Mexican Liberal Party. And he was dedicated to, or the party was dedicated to overthrowing the dictatorship of then President Diaz. And this meeting with Sarabia led her to spend a great deal of her time from 1907 to 1911 raising money for Mexican revolutionaries in efforts that eventually led to the establishment of a new democratic government, the election of President Madero, and the country's first ever acceptance of union organizing in its history. She would be welcomed back into Mexico for like decades to come by the people there. It was awesome. She ended up going back to West Virginia, where she landed herself right in the middle of the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek mine wars. And it was there that she saw the miners being threatened with brutal fucking beatings, violence at the hand of the mine guards. And West Virginia, I mean, union organizing in this era was always risky business. West Virginia and Appalachian union organizing was literal fucking warfare. She had previously spoken out against violence. Like, remember, she was like, oh, don't go turn yourself in, even if you're not guilty, like it'll be fine. And then saw a bunch of miners get killed because of it. But in this situation in West Virginia, she was like, the men need guns. She was told that she would be killed by mine guards and operators if she tried to organize their workers, but she kept on going. In one legendary instance, while she walked with the miners to one of their nearby camps, she was met by armed guards who had a machine gun pointed at the miners accompanying her. And supposedly, she approached the guards, put her hand over the muzzle of the gun, and said to the guard closest to her, young man, I want to tell you that if you shoot one bullet out of this gun at those men, if you touch one of my white hairs, that creek will run with blood, and yours will be the first to crimson it. Eventually, I know, fucking brutal. Eventually, Mother Jones and 5 others were arrested, and they were taken to a martial law zone where they were tried by military court and convicted. Mother Jones was sentenced to jail, but instead was kept under guard in a private house in the martial law zone. She was kept in one room for almost 3 months, where she slept on a mattress on the floor, had to go outside to wash her face. Eventually, she grew sick with pneumonia. And after more than a year of bloody violence, the strike did pay off, and the miners won many of their demands, and Mother Jones became even more well-known and well-loved. She made her way to more strikes in Colorado, and then some smaller strikes around the country, and even up to British Columbia and Western Canada. And in World War I, Mother Jones suddenly has a reckoning, I guess, and becomes a huge fan of Uncle Sam and the military-industrial complex when she sees the ways that war creates employment, and the profit even results in some increased wages for the workers. So she's like, yes, government, military, good, all of a sudden. And even despite this, the rich and powerful were able to leverage the Red Scare. They accused Mother Jones of being a communist revolutionary, despite her increasing fondness for the capitalist war machine. And she, among this, like, kind of got chased out of some places and ends up back in West Virginia in 1921, which some of your listeners may know is right in the middle of another ongoing labor war, this time in Logan County, in a situation that was building up to be the battle on Blair Mountain. So she lands right smack in Logan County, 1921, boiling pot of water. She tries to calm the miners, and her patriotic change of heart had led her to believe that their fighting would not help them. It's only going to lead to unnecessary deaths. She tried to prevent them from moving forward with the bloody fight by lying. She made up a supposed telegram that had been received by President Warren Harding, saying that the president had promised he would help remove the guards from the mines. And then when the workers found out that this was a lie, they accused her of being a traitor, and they basically shamed her out of West Virginia. The following year, her health really began to fail. She had rheumatism, she began to go deaf, she started losing her eyesight, and yet she still managed to participate in several strikes. She continued to visit her old friends and political leaders. She was even still giving speeches. And her last active participation in a strike, so that was 1922, and her last active participation in a strike was until 1925 among 1,500 striking dressmakers in Chicago, which really just brought life full circle, I feel like, for her. And whether or not it was really the date of her birth, she celebrated her 100th birthday on May 1st, 1930, surrounded by friends, union leaders, and reporters. Paramount News sent a movie crew to film her, and talking to the movie camera, she told workers to stick together and be loyal to each other. She died later that year on a Sunday, November 30th, in the midst of the Great Depression. She was buried in a UMW cemetery in Mount Olive, Illinois, where she had requested, the only union-owned cemetery in the United States. And upon her death, an anonymous poet wrote about Mother Jones, and the poem was put to music and sung in the mountains of West Virginia. And I'm going to end us with this poem. The world today is mourning the death of Mother Jones. Grief and sorrow hover over the miners' homes. This grand old champion of labor has gone to a better land. But the hard-working miners, they miss her guiding hand. Through the hills and over valleys, in every mining town, Mother Jones was ready to help them. She never turned them down. In front, with the striking miners, she always could be found. She fought for right and justice. She took a noble stand. With a spirit strong and fearless, she hated that which was wrong. She never gave up fighting until her breath was gone. May all the workers all get together to carry out her plan and bring back better conditions to every laboring man.
Oh.
If you're not crying, I didn't do my job.
Yay.
If there's one thing that, like, I mean, it's the same mountain range. So Appalachian people and Irish people, like, really, it's probably like in the dirt for us, but it's just the spite that we're able to just have. Because 100 is a very long time, especially when she's like, yeah.
Like,
putting
I'm
herself
gonna keep
in,
fucking
yeah.
living because you don't want me to. That's
Right.
Yeah.
What a wild little lady.
What a wild little lady. Wild journey indeed. I was like, as I was reading this stuff, trying to prepare for this episode, I'm like, I don't even know. Like, there's just so much. What do I include? What do I not include? Because, like, damn, the woman lived 100 lives.
Yeah. Good Lord. That was great. That was definitely one of the most prepared guests that we've ever brought on. So thank you. That was a lot. That was a lot of shit. She lived wow. That's just crazy.
Yeah, like organized in basically every state that was around at the time with industry in it. And
I also love how like her like stuff changed. It's just so it was I don't know. It's funny because like knowing like certain moments of history where like pivotal moments where like I can understand. I know like why people decide. Like for example, the whole World War I thing that really split the Socialist Party of America. When you have that was the big split. Like I think Trotsky came over to the United States and really riled people up, and the Socialist Party split into what became the Communist Party USA. And that's when you had like John Reed and like those guys split and be like the anti-war and be communist. And then you had like Debs' Socialist Party being like the party of like, hey, we need to, continue the war effort, even though Debs himself was against the war. It was just weird. It was a weird time of. It just goes to show like it just I don't know how to like put it into words. Like it just goes to show like how some people like within the working class will be like, oh yeah, World War I, like we should do it. It's good. Yeah, it's great for business. And then the other ones are like, no, I don't want to fucking die of this bullshit. So that's when you see the split. So it's very interesting to know like where she fell and all that. And then another thing that you mentioned, Colorado's mining history is that's the Ludlow massacre. So it's a very violent, very violent time. People don't know. It's probably one of the bloodiest, horrific massacres where the Colorado National Guard was actually paid by John D. Rockefeller to massacre these coal miners.
He was there during all of that. Yeah.
It's like the most infamous event during that massacre was it was women and children hid under. They would dig holes and they would hide under the tents, and the troops came and set them on fire, and they actually burned like 8 people alive, including women and children, when they massacred the coal miners. It's very horrific massacre that like leads to the Battle of Blair Mountain. Like all this stuff builds up to like fuck these guys, and we're gonna revolt. But yeah, there's just I didn't realize how like she was everywhere. I also like didn't know how like all her opinions changed. And she was a very interesting woman. Like she did a lot definitely in 100 years that she was alive. It's crazy.
Yeah, even in my previous episode, so I've done it wasn't an episode about her. She was part of an episode that was like a larger series on kind of the mine wars in general in the Appalachian area. And I didn't know, even after having read about her for that episode, I had no idea until I was preparing for this that she helped to found the IWW. Like it was the only woman in the room for those conversations where that was decided.
Wild. I mean, I don't really have anything else to say. You basically said everything.
Was it too much? I feel like you're like,
it was
God.
great. No, it was great. Usually it's like, oh shit, are we gonna have enough time? We're gonna get at least an hour. No, that was perfect.
Cool.
Anyone else have anything to say? My mom texted me something funny during the episode. I'll share that at the very end before.
Oh,
Mark.
well, I was listening instead of being on my phone. So
my
You
mother
did look
texted me.
very into it, Mark.
My mother texted me, so I'm sorry that as a good Italian son, I have to.
You were listening to a woman. That's what this was.
Exactly.
Unlike your ancestors in the minor.
All right. First off, I looked that shit up. Okay. Don't the
Come on,
majority.
so that's what you were doing on your phone instead of listening to a woman in this setting.
I was like, why I couldn't find a specific reason, but I did find that they made up the largest, I guess, nationality of coal miners.
They were ornery motherfuckers. Like that's not a good enough reason.
Yeah, I don't know why they did. Apparently, no, I believed it. Apparently, there was a huge. Apparently, there's a massive explosion around that time that rocked one of the mines, and the majority of the miners that died were Italian. I don't know what their beef was, like why they didn't want to organize. Who knows? Guineas can be stubborn, so it's whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You don't say.
I know, right? I still think it was because they weren't given enough wine and pizza and other stuff.
Yeah, pizza.
There's the carbs.
When she went to go talk to him, she put pineapple on it, and that's why they didn't.
That's it. No, we're done, Maddie. Whoa.
I would have walked out too, honestly. If
done. We're not following her. She put the pineapple on the pizza. We're done. We get out of here.
Over. We'll work for slave wages. We don't care.
You can kill us in these mines, but don't you fucking put pineapple.
Commit this act of blasphemy.
I'll die in the bowels of the earth before I'll eat that fucking pineapple.
Mamma mia. Oh man. Yeah. Y'all have anything to say? Like that was a great episode. Thank you, Chelsea.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
we don't really talk a lot about coal mining because we only done like one episode on it. So there you go. It's not like not a big thing in the deep south, but yeah, that's great. Now I know more about Mother Jones, and she's not just a newspaper.
She's not just a newspaper. More than a newspaper.
Any final thoughts on Mother Jones? You've been talking for a long time. This episode's been going on this is great. I'm not complaining.
I know. I feel that's why I was like, is it too much? Are y'all's like brains now mush because I talked at you for like an hour and a half?
No, we gotta go organize some coal mines right now. So I just feel like getting on a train and organizing coal mines. I did think of something though, like that Pullman dude who like invented the sleeping car. Like imagine like what do you do? Just take a regular train car, rip the seats out, put some beds in it. Like it's not really innovation. It's just like I invented the sleeping car. All right, dude, you put some bunk beds in a fucking train car, like eat shit.
They've managed to still be called that up until this day. Like we have sleeper trains in the UK and they call them Pullman cars.
Really?
Yeah. There's a specific train that goes from London to Edinburgh overnight. It's like one of the few sleeper services that we have left in this country, and you can get a Pullman car in that. Yeah.
Y'all want to know what my mom said?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes.
She texted me, how stupid is she texted me, how stupid is this British monarch stuff? What the fuck? Who cares? People are actually taking it seriously.
It was all a big PR stunt. Like the monarchy doesn't actually exist. It's all just a PR stunt.
A major psyop. A huge psyop.
It's only been going on for over 1,000 years at this point.
The ultimate long game psyop.
Like 4 corgis just came out of like an unzipped suit when they announced it.
And like there's been like fandom wars because you have like the Norman kings, you got the Saxon kings, you've got with the Hanoverian line, you've got all these fandoms in it, and they go to war every once in a while. We get a new one.
It's just a really long game of Dungeons and Dragons. It's gone way too long. This is the next
simulation theory, but make it tabletop.
They just keep rolling 20s. It will never end.
It's just George R.R. Martin like in the clouds writing this book, and it's just the British monarchy. This is the book he hasn't finished yet.
God, and I gotta live. I live in a country with a fucking king now. What the fuck?
Not very girl boss of England.
Holy shit! God damn it! Mark, you have the best fucking one-liners. I swear to God.
Like, this country is so into it that we're gonna have new mailboxes, we're gonna have new coins, new money, we're gonna have new stamps. There's gonna be a new symbols. Yeah, our stamps have the queen's head on it. Our coins have the queen's head on it.
They're like, all of the money is broken now. We have to replace it.
It's not like you can't go into a shop and use it, but we're going to get new versions of it pretty fucking soon, probably. And there's probably like, we were thinking, like, how do we still have to look at
the same old fucking white dudes from like the goddamn 1800s on our money?
Americans and history are the weirdest fucking thing. I don't know. I don't get it.
Our emotional support racist on our paper money. We can't get rid of them. We all just throw out the queen. You loved her so much that it's time to erase her.
Oh my God, Mark.
God damn it, Mark.
I didn't even say my little ending thing yet.
I know, right? Oh my God. Anything else about Mother Jones? I think that was a lot. So I have nothing else to say about Mother Jones.
Everything's been said.
I'll be back to read her autobiography word for word in the next episode.
That's gonna be a Patreon reward. If anyone wants that, it's gonna be our After Dark series. Chelsea reads the entire autobiography.
A Patreon on ours for their podcast.
Exactly. It's
gonna be dual posted. My patrons can listen to it too. It'll be fine.
That's how that works. All right, y'all. Dixieland, the proletariat. We believe the South will rise again, but this time for the right reasons, those being worker-owned means of production, decolonization, and self-determination for all oppressed peoples. Make sure to click on our link tree in our show notes to find all of our social media. We are coming to you from the birthplace of civil rights movement, Montgomery, Alabama, as well as sweet Georgia and jolly old England. We also like to recognize we're recording on land that is occupied and rightfully belongs to the Muskogee and Creek Nation. Chelsea, thank you so much. Where can people find Rednecks Rising podcast, and where can people find you online?
In the ether. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find us. We have a link tree, linktr.ee / rednecksrising.
Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes for sure.
And on that link tree, you can find podcasts wherever you can listen to it, or wherever you like to listen to those. And you can find us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok primarily, which is where I am. I'm on all of those profiles that are run by Rednecks Rising. It's just me. It's very lonely. I don't have a trio that I get to be with all the time. And
listen, it's all cracked up what you think. Okay, sometimes
put up with other people's shit.
Yeah,
like
I get
shit. I feel really bad for you guys. Hey, it made him shut up. Did you hear that?
All right, and muted.
I'm back.
Damn it. Nevertheless, she persisted.
I will say that we do make Nelson the point of contact for everything. Mark and I don't fuck with it. Nelson is the one who fucks with it.
What do we say? This is my hell. This is my reparation.
Yes,
exactly.
Yes.
This is being on a podcast with two indigenous people, just getting yelled at.
And I tell our fans, like, hey, if you want to talk to me, you can find me, but you have to go through Nelson first.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find him, and then he'll tell me, and then I'll decide if I want to talk to you.
I was like the head of a crime family. Like, yo, the Indian
family. Just walk into Kai's office.
Yo, the big mountain family over here. You don't want to fuck with them.
Nelson, you're now in charge of screening anyone who wants to get in touch with me too.
So, I'm great. I'm great at it. I'll gladly tell people to go fuck themselves. I love that message request feature on Instagram, but like, nope.
Denied.
All right.
Yes. So sorry, social media. And then we don't have Patreon, but we have Ko-Fi, which is very similar. So you can find that on our link tree too, and keep up with like any updates or special merch and stuff.
Hell yeah. All right, sweet Mark.
Don't let the door hit you on your way out.